Kings fans sound off about the slump, Drew Doughty's return, and trade possibilities on this Friday Kings fan feedback edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is a Kings fan feedback Friday, your chance to sound off, critique, praise, complain, celebrate our beloved Los Angeles Kings. We do it every Friday, off-season, regular season, and postseason. We have 19 emails this week. Normally we get between 9 and 12. Not surprised that we got this many because of what's going on with the team and people like to complain. However, not all is doom and gloom with the emails. Now, I want to try and get them all in. I don't know if it's going to be possible, but we're going to fly through it. I have edited down a lot of the emails, but I've kept in your major points and your major questions, and I've also tried to cut down on my answers. So let's do this. Our first email comes from Scott in Simi Valley, and he says, well, seizing on something positive in the Kings' future. Most of the games are close, and the Kings are coming home. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm sure the team is too. But it's hard to picture this team going far in the playoffs without a trade or two. I haven't studied the games of Kyle Palmieri or Brock Besser, and I'm not sure if they provide what the Kings need or if the Kings have enough trade capital to make a move. The roster doesn't seem deep enough to wheel and deal with. I like Jim Hiller, but I'm not liking his demotions of Brandt Clarke. Comparing Clark's potential ceiling versus Spence, there's no comparison. I realize Clarke needs some seasoning and has not been stellar defensively, but Hiller is going about it all wrong. Brandt Clarke is about the most confident young NHL player you'll ever see, but his body language and play lately tells me he's not liking Hiller's moves. The last thing the Kings need to do is ruin the few young talents they have left. And that was from Scott in Simi Valley. I'm going to address all the trade kind of speculation and questions. I'll talk about Kyle Palmieri and Brock Besser. I'll just repeat what I've said about Brandt Clarke. Yes, he has a much higher upside to Jordan Spence. But right now, lately, Spence has played better. And with the Kings needing every little advantage they can right now in this terrible slump, and somebody had to come out of the lineup for Drew Doughty, I understand why it's Brandt Clarke. So again, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I understand why that move was made. Robert in Hawthorne says, upon watching the games on the road trip, I've come to the realization that Rob Blake should package a trade deal that includes Trevor Moore, Trevor Lewis, and Phillip Danault for a scorer. Danault does play some defense, but we need scoring. We'll address the trade talk in a minute. Ray in Woodland Hills says, watching the Kings get shut out twice in 24 hours filled me with a special kind of dread that only hockey can produce. Wish I could just write it off, but the string of losses is beginning to affect the bigger picture. My instinct is to say the solution is in the locker room. We don't need to mess up the team chemistry with a hasty trade. The team has been close in most of the losses. Goaltending and defense has kept them in games. Where's the 12 forwards? What's it going to take to get these guys to be dangerous? Why does it feel like they're just shooting from the outside? Why is nobody driving to the net to catch a rebound? Do you suspect any of these guys are on the trade block? And is signing Gavrikov still a priority for this season? This has been a hard month for the city of LA with the fires, and even athletes are not immune from this devastation. I hope that's the explanation for the on-ice product as of late, and that the team starts getting hot come playoff time. And again, that was from Ray in Woodland Hills. Maybe all of it has been a factor right now for the Kings. The off-the-ice stuff, tough schedule, so many road games, officiating, and the Kings not getting any breaks. Maybe all of it is factoring into what we have seen and why we're all frustrated right now with the Kings. Eric checks in from Parts Unknown. He says, do you think it's time for a culture change in the front office? I've been patient with the rebuild and taking the next step from bubble team to contender, but I'm seriously starting to lose faith. It's hard to see players leave the organization and thrive in other markets. Velarde, PLD, Faber, Dursey, as well as mismanagements of prospects Bjornfoot and Kaliev. I feel like the Kings are stuck in mediocrity and we're closer to a rebuild than a Stanley Cup. Well, Eric, in parts unknown, if the Kings don't make the playoffs or are out in the first round again, it's definitely time for a change. I would be shocked if Rob Blake is still the general manager if that happens. As for the players that you listed as thriving, I will say Gabe Velarde is clearly a player that the Kings never should have let go, especially considering what the issues that Kings have now. He's a right shot. They need a right shot. He's very productive on the power play. They need help on the power play. So that was a huge blunder. I hear a lot of people talk about Brock Faber. I doubt he's any better defensively than any of our top guys. He has less points than Brant Clark, and he has one more goal than Mikey Anderson. Drew Dursey has been hurt all season. I think he's played 4 games. Tobias Bjornfoot has played 8 games for the Florida Panthers. He's kind of their Jacob Moverar. And Arthur Kaliev, way too early to tell. He's got 2 goals in 10 games, and one of them you or I could have scored on. So I don't know that all the list of the players that you mentioned are thriving with other organizations. I will say Gabe Velarde, yes. The other guys either have been okay or not done much. Omar in Pomona says, can't help but feel concerned on the way the team has been playing. I try to stay positive because I've seen countless teams go through slumps and eventually play hard again. I see it all the time with baseball. I know it's a different sport, but a similar foundation. With that said, do you believe the Kings will actually add at the trade deadline? Seeing Calgary out of their roster with only 1 point behind the Kings has to put pressure on Blake, right? Can't forget about the Canucks either. I don't see how they sustain a long playoff run with the same squad, talking about the Kings. And again, that was from Omar in Pomona. Well, if you missed it, the Calgary Flames did make a trade with the Philadelphia Flyers and added 2 players, 2 forwards that could potentially help, Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost. Now, but they're both former first-round picks. They've had some success in Philadelphia. It's that whole change of scenery thing, or they're going to come to our team, and John Tortorella is the guy to play for, so maybe they go someplace and they clear the air and they play better. But I think the bigger thing is it sends a message. The Calgary Flames are telling their fans and the rest of the league, we're going to be buyers. We're going to make moves to help ourselves. And was this a earth-shattering trade? No, but they are looking to improve. They're looking to help themselves, and they probably did a little bit with this trade. They also got a couple of not first-round picks, but draft picks out of it as well. But I do believe the Kings will make a trade. I don't think it's going to be anything dramatic. So does that put a little extra pressure on Rob Blake? Maybe a little. Brian in Los Alamitos says every team, even the top contenders, have low points during the course of an entire season. None could be worse than the Kings' losing streak last year, but they still made the playoffs. So I'm not going to panic yet. A buddy of mine heard a rumor about a trade that would involve Brant Clark for Elias Pettersson. Does this trade sound appealing to you, or does Clark's potential outweigh what Peterson could bring to the Kings? And again, that was from Brian in Los Alamitos. Everything I have heard backs up what I said earlier this week, that the Kings have no interest in trading Brant Clark. Now, is he untouchable? No. If some move came across that they thought they couldn't pass up and Brant Clark had to be a part of it, I think the Kings would do it. But again, they're not looking to trade him, as was kind of rumored this past week. Now, if you missed it, there was another trade today in the NHL, a pretty big trade. And I know our friend of the show, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty, was a proponent of the Kings trying to go out and land JT Miller from the Vancouver Canucks. JT Miller was traded to the New York Rangers today. Now, if you've been following this story, and maybe you haven't, apparently there was a locker room feud between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, and it got so bad that the general manager even acknowledged that it was an issue. And so the Canucks were looking to trade one of those guys. Turns out it was JT Miller. So it was asked in the email about Elias Pettersson. I don't think because Miller was traded, the Canucks are now looking to trade Elias Pettersson. But if they were, would I consider trading Brant Clark for Elias Pettersson? I would consider it. Yes, I would consider it. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the Canucks are looking to trade him. And the Kings aren't looking to trade Brant Clark either. Alex in Santa Ana says the Kings continue to struggle offensively, and I'm not sure why. This is kind of right where I expected the team to be with just over halfway through the season. A good team, a playoff team most likely, but not a sure thing. I'm sure your inbox is about to be, if not already, full of Rob Blake, what the F, trade this person, and blah, 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 AKA a lot of negativity. I always liked how you handled these emails. You come at it with a level head. I wanted to turn the tables on you and bring some possible fun and positivity. I wanted to ask you to come up with your blockbuster trade for the Kings. He says, think Mikko Rantanen and Marty Necas level. I'm not just asking you to be 100% cap compliant or even super realistic, just in the realm of possible, just for fun. You're the GM, dealer's choice. And again, that was from Alex in Santa Ana. Okay, so now let me kind of go back and address some of the other questions involving Kings trade possibilities. Scott asked about Kyle Palmieri and Brock Besser. Both are right-handed shots, so that would help the Kings. Palmieri's 33. Besser's about to turn 28. Palmieri had 30 goals last year, 13 so far this year, 10 goals on the power play last year, just 2 this year playing for a subpar Islanders team. Brock Besser had 40 goals last season, but typically, if you look at his career, he's more of a 25-goal guy. He has 16 goals this season. Had 16 power play goals last year, 5 this year, playing for a okay Canucks team. So both Kyle Palmieri and Brock Besser are unrestricted free agents at the end of the season. Palmieri makes $5 million a year, or is making $5 million this year. Brock Besser is making 6.6. Are either of these guys what Kings fans are looking for? Probably not. If you were going to pick one of the two, I think you'd probably go for Brock Besser because he's younger and has a higher upside because he did have a 40-goal season. Now, that was probably a career year, but still, that potential is there. So those are 2 names that have been brought up. And again, would the Canucks want to make a trade within the division with a team they're competing head-to-head against for a playoff spot? Potentially, probably not. Robert asked about trading Trevor Moore, Trevor Lewis, and Philip Deneau for a scorer. So I will ask you, Robert, would you take Trevor Moore, Trevor Lewis, and Philip Deneau for a legitimate NHL scorer? I don't think so. So guess what? Nobody else is going to do that either. So I mean, I understand, these 3 guys you think are not performing up to standard and you want to move them, but you're not going to get anything for them. I mean, Trevor Moore's having a really bad year and he's signed for multiple years to go. That's not somebody who has a lot of value. Trevor Lewis is on his last legs. Philip Deneau maybe a little bit, but trading him, is that going to return you a legitimate scoring threat? If a team wants to trade some legitimate scoring threats to the LA Kings, they're going to do it for prospects or number 1 draft picks. They're not going to do it for Trevor Lewis's or Trevor Moore's. Ray asked about signing Gavrikov. Is it a priority? I don't think so, mostly because I think Gavrikov wants to test the market. This is probably his last best chance to get a big payday because he's having a great season. He's, just on this side of 30. And again, this is probably his best chance. So I think he's going to test free agency and I think he's going to go to the highest bidder. And I don't think that's the LA Kings. So is signing him a priority? No, because like I said, I think he's probably told the Kings, I'm not going to re-sign during the season unless they offer him something ridiculous which they're not. So I think he's gone at the end of the year. Alex wanted me to come up with some Kings blockbuster trade. So I'm going to go dumb and dumber here and say, so you're saying there's a chance. So we know the Kings need scoring. We know they need a right-handed shot. We know they need help on the power play. Is there a team out there that has an elite right-handed shot who's, still relatively young, who could help on the power play? And it would need to be a team that is probably not in a playoff spot because no team that's in a playoff spot is going to trade an elite guy like that. And most of them are all very good players. Leon Draisaitl. We mentioned Mikko Rantanen earlier. Guys like that. So there's one team in the East that currently is not holding a playoff spot right now and has an elite right-handed shot scorer on their roster, and that is the Boston Bruins, and that player is David Pastrnak. He's 28 years old, and he's averaged 43 goals a season over the last 7 seasons in which he's played 60 games or more. If the Bruins go into a slump, if they fall out of the playoff picture, and again, right now they're not holding a wild card spot, they're the first team on the outside looking in, could the Boston Bruins decide to start a rebuild and maybe trade David Pastrnak? And supposedly there's a feud between him and Brad Marchand, although I don't know if there's any truth to that at all. Some radio guy said it, threw it out there. Okay, so also David Pastrnak would have to waive his full no movement clause. But you wanted a blockbuster there. I don't think it would ever happen, but maybe I'll just throw that out there as just for fun. All right, we're just getting started. Kings fans chiming in next about Drew Doughty's return and more. That's next on this fan feedback edition of Locked On LA Kings. Those of us who live in Southern California are so lucky we have a place where we can experience so many amazing live events, sports, concerts, theater events, comedy shows. When you check out these events, no matter where you live, you need to do what I do, and that is use Gametime for all my ticket needs. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets for live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff and shows you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. The all-in pricing feature shows you the total up front with no surprise checkouts at the end, and you will get the lowest price guaranteed, or you will get credited 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, I already got carried away with that first segment, which was about 14 minutes, which is about 4 minutes longer than it's supposed to be. But we get right back into it. Andy from Guelph in Ontario says, great to see Drew Doughty back, and it's been frustrating to watch the Kings giving away points. Some of the losses recently have been close, but they should be sitting at around 63, 65 points. Instead, they're dangerously close to being on the outside. They need scoring desperately and a change. I know he's a California kid, but I think Trevor Moore is expendable, and I'd also consider moving Gavrikov to clear cap space to acquire someone of an impact. A guy like Kyle Palmieri doesn't do it. We will be okay, I think, but I want to be more than just a first-round playoff team. That's Andy and Guelph, and we all feel the same way. Again, Vladislav Gavrikov has a full no-movement clause, so it is very, very unlikely he is going to go everywhere. He would have to agree to a trade, and I don't think he's going to do that. Again, the only way that would happen is if the Kings' season goes right down the elevator shaft, and maybe he wants out to play for a contender, but I doubt that'll happen. Andy in La Habra, who says he's a season ticket holder, checking in, he says, first, I want to say, huge fan of the show. Grateful for the time and the effort you put into this to keep us up to date with all the Kings news. You're welcome, Andy. Seems to me like Drew Doughty is desperate to come back and play, which is something I'm excited and grateful for. However, I feel like he is more motivated to play in the tournament for Canada instead of focusing on returning to the team and prioritizing his health and motivation for the Kings. I feel like it's a bit selfish on his part. What do you think? And that was Andy in La Habra. Well, Drew's timeline to return from his injury wasn't moved up so that he could audition for the Four Nations face-off. And Alex Pietrangelo had to pull out to make a spot available, possibly, for Drew Doughty. So I don't think there was nothing fishy about that. I do think playing for his country is very important to Drew. There's nothing wrong with that. But I still think he can be dedicated to helping the Kings be the best they can be while also wanting to play for his country. And I do think that it's possible. Of course, injuries are always a concern, no doubt. But I think it could benefit Drew to play in this tournament. He gets to play potentially against some high-level competition in some big games, and maybe that gets him more ready for a stretch run to the playoffs since he's missed so much time. But I know he does very much want to play in this tournament. I don't think, though, in my mind, that is somehow, he's putting the Kings like in the back seat, so to speak. Jim in Lakewood says, as you recall, I told you a while back after I saw the gelling of the newbies and the old bees of the team that it might be difficult to blend Drew Doughty back in. Now, if I'm crazy, tell me, but did the team get shut out 2 nights in a row the both times he was playing? This goes with my other point about him and his $11 million contract and his being a fit for Toronto, where he's from, and a team in a different spot who would thrive with him. I think his days has passed here, and I think he will be traded. And lastly, I think it's stupid for him to play in that series for Canada. Dude, you make $11 million. We can't risk you getting hurt again if you're going to be here. And that was Jim in Lakewood. Look, I said that I did not see that Drew Doughty had provided a spark that we were kind of hoping for when he returned to the lineup. However, I would not go so far as to say somehow Drew Doughty is to blame for the Kings being shut out in back-to-back games. As for a Drew Doughty trade, his contract certainly hurts his chances of being traded unless the Kings were somehow going to retain some of his salary, which they're not going to do. He also has a modified no trade clause. Now, I'm sure he would waive it if he had a chance maybe to go to Toronto. But that would be another wildly unpopular trade for Rob Blake, who traded away Jonathan Quick. So I don't see it happening. I don't know that Toronto would want him. As for the Four Nations face-off, I've said I think they should play that event before the season starts. So if there is a serious injury to someone, that they would still have the possibility of returning in time for the playoffs. I don't like them playing this in season. I don't like pausing the season for this event. Danny in Toronto says, just finished watching the Florida game and wow, this is a serious scoring slump. I really think the line mixing and the 11-7 has caught up to the Kings. I had a feeling this might happen. What are your thoughts on the slump? Thank goodness Drew is back and we have the majority of games at home. That was Danny in Toronto. So I guess Andy is kind of implying that the Kings are tired because they played with 11 forwards so much, and that's why they're not scoring. I don't think so. To me, the offensive issues are not a lack of energy. I think it's a lack of execution and finishing. It's obviously a bad stretch of games. I completely understand the concern, but at the end, I think it's just a bad stretch. I think that the Kings will snap out of it, but I agree with you. Having most of the games remaining at home is something to be encouraged by. Scott in Buena Park says, I wanted to put my 2 cents in about the offsides and replay. I hate replay when they are used for technicalities and not something that directly impacts the scoring. This goes for any sport. For offsides, adjust the ruling. Replays are only allowed to review the play 5 seconds before the stoppage of play. This basically covers the initial rush into the zone when a missed offsides call would have been to the advantage of the team on the rush. Any extended play in the zone is not affected by a missed offsides call. As always, great job on the podcast. Glad you're doing the podcast over the weekend now, and it gives me something else to look forward to on work days. So Scott is also kind of in agreement with me about the replays for the offsides. And Dave in Seattle says, I believe the team will get through this. Just got to get that ketchup bottle flowing, right, Eddie? Yes, the old ketchup bottle. He says, I've never been a fan of replay for offsides. The way I look at it, there can be blown calls both ways, and when a good play is blown dead for offsides, you don't get your outnumbered attack back. Why would a league that wants more goals scored hinder themselves with this ridiculous rule? I've always hated the rule, but especially after that beautiful would-be goal by Byfield, might have been just what they needed for him to get the team going. I hear a lot of people saying trades need to happen, but I'm not sure the Kings have a lot of trade chips at the moment. And the trip on a positive note, get back home and reset. Hopefully Mikey's injury is not long-term. Go Kings, go. And that was Dave in Seattle. I will say offensively, I could not agree more with you on the replay stuff, which we've talked about. I did see that John Hoven from Mayor's Manor reported that Mikey Anderson is day-to-day. So that seems like a good sign, although I've seen guys who are listed as day-to-day be out like a month. However, the timing of the Four Nations face-off, it's going to give him an extra couple of weeks of rest time. So if you're going to get hurt, now is a pretty good time to get hurt because you got that extra rest coming up. Up next, we hear first from angry Kings fans, including one who says he has had enough. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. And you can adjust your bet as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. It is a Super Bowl rematch from a couple of years ago. Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. Kansas City looking for a three-peat. They are a 1.5 favorite, and the over-under is at 48.5. Download the app and head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, let's get back to these emails. Wilson in Quebec City checks in and he says, trade deadline is quickly approaching, and we all know that Blake won't do anything. So let's avoid the disappointment and get rid of Blake now, along with Bergevin, of course. This team has no identity, no grit, no urgency, no dominance. Other teams look forward to playing the Kings. No one fears them. 15% power play, come on. Team needs to shake up. Fiala, Deneau, more. All need to be moved now while they still have a certain value. Imagine the cap room. Defense has never been the issue, but scoring is. Go and get a top quality scorer. Move LaFerriere back to the top line where he was productive and also give him power play minutes on his off wing. That is Wilson in Quebec City. Well, Wilson, unless the absolute bottom falls out of the Kings, as I've mentioned, let's say this current slump stretches beyond the Four Nations break and LA falls out of a playoff spot. That is the only way the Kings will fire Rob Blake within the season. And I don't think that's going to happen. And I will completely disagree with you that this team has no identity or grit. They're one of the toughest defensive teams in the NHL. And I promise you, other teams, especially other teams' top forwards, hate playing against the LA Kings because they are going to have to work their asses off to get scoring chances and points that night. So, yes, the offense isn't there, but I do not agree that this team doesn't have an identity or that they don't have grit. Mike in Carson City, Nevada says, so we can't score a goal to save our freaking lives, and you take Brant Clark out of the lineup. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. The honeymoon is over. Hiller, Blake, and Robitaille need to go. Even when we were winning games 2-1, we were the most boring team in the league to watch, and now losing and not scoring is obviously even worse to watch. This team is unwatchable. I'd rather have a coach with a more offensive system and lose 5-4 every night. At least we would be entertaining, or there would be some entertainment value. There is way too much talent on this team to play such a defensive shell and handicapping your offensive players. Until they fire the coach and management, I'm done. Lose to the Oilers in 7, then in 6, then in 5. Going to be a sweep this year because no way in hell we beat Edmonton 4 times. Love you, Eddie. And that was Mike in Carson City, who apparently is done with the Kings. Well, I used to be a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, and I decided a few years back that I wasn't going to watch or pay any attention to that team until I felt that they were trying. I'm not talking about the players. I'm talking about ownership. They rarely spent any money and literally were not trying to compete. So in that scenario, I understand why a fan would say, why should I care if you don't care? That said, the Kings are trying to win. Management is spending to the cap. The players are doing their best. Yes, this slump is difficult. I understand the frustration, but I honestly don't understand giving up as a fan. This team is in a playoff spot. They have been in a playoff spot pretty much the entire season. And so if you want to give up, you can, but I don't really get that. Frustration, I understand frustration, but I don't understand saying I'm done with the team. And as far as the entertainment value goes, for me, I'm entertained by winning. The Kings played an 8-7 overtime game against Ottawa and they lost. I was not entertained by that in any way. I would rather win 1-0. That's entertaining to me, but that's me. Brian in Tampa, Florida says, if Rob Blake's contract is not renewed after the season, at least he's not leaving the Kings saddled with bad long-term contracts. The NHL salary cap is currently at $88 million per year. It's going to rise significantly to $113.5 million by the 2027-28 season. Our long-term contracts for players like Mikey Anderson, Kevin Fiala, and Quentin Byfield should look like huge bargains over the next 4 to 5 years. We have Alex Turcotte signed for less than $1 million until after the 2027 season, and 3 extremely cheap goaltending prospects on the way. The Kings are in a bad stretch right now, but the future still looks bright. Go Kings, go. And that was Brian in Tampa. When you look at the Kings salary cap going forward, Drew Doughty make $11 million for 2 more seasons is still kind of tough. Adrian Kempe, absolute bargain, $5.5 million. He's going to get paid after next season. Darcy Kemper has 2 more years at $5.25 million. Trevor Moore, 3 years left after this year, $4.2 million. We mentioned Vladislav Gavrikov. I think he's gone after the season. That'll free up some room here in the near future. So I think in terms of cap, the Kings, I think, look all right. Like they're going to be in pretty decent shape here going forward. Rob in Westchester says, first, it has been frustrating over the last few games on this road trip, but I remain mostly unconcerned. The Kings have been playing fairly well against some good teams. Their shots need to be at the net rather than over and around it for them to score, but I think this slump will pass, and as I said, unconcerned. However, the game against the Panthers may have been an example of the worst officiating I've seen in years. I saw at least a missed holding by the Panthers against LaFerriere, a tripping call against the Panthers that caused the goal to be called back, and a high-sticking penalty, the Panthers hitting Byfield. What are your thoughts, Rob in Westchester? I don't know if it's the worst officiating I've seen in years. I would say it was probably the worst officiating I've seen this season against the Kings. That Trevor Lewis goalie interference call and the call that wasn't called against Byfield, both were missed calls, and they were both very impactful calls as far as how the game went. Bill is from Parts Unknown, and he says, I wanted to reach out with an email and provide my support for a 7-day-a-week show. I appreciate your honest commentary, something you couldn't necessarily do if you were doing a show as a Kings employee. The objectivity analysis is important, and I appreciate your opinions, although I don't always agree. I very much hope that you can get the show 7 days a week. I'll be tuning in for sure. You do a fantastic job keeping us updated on the games, both with the recaps and precaps. I also enjoy your guests with Nick Nixon and Jim Fox as my favorites. I've met both. Those guys are couldn't be nicer to the fans. Although I have serious questions about Nick's team's golf score in the prior Jim Fox, Dave Taylor charity golf tournament. All the best, and always go Kings go. And again, that was Bill in Parts Unknown. Next time you email Bill, if you could let us know where you're from, I would appreciate it. And good news, I have been given the clearance to go ahead by management to do a show 7 days a week. So we are going to be your team literally every day. Locked on LA Kings will be 7 days a week. And I will say, yes, Nick Nixon, Jim Fox, and Daryl Evans are three of the most genuinely nice men you will ever meet. And we'll wrap it up real quick with Ed and Brea. Wonder what he's going to say. He says, I will say that I sadly was expecting this all season. Convince Kevin Fiala to waive his no-trade clause, trade him to a contender like Toronto for Mitch Marner, or Dallas for maybe Jason Robertson. I agree with other Kings fans that Rob Blake is on the hot seat. And like a year ago with T-Mac DeHiller, we need a new guy to view our roster. I will say this, Ed. I'm blaming you for this recent losing streak for the LA Kings, because when you were guaranteeing the Kings were going to lose, they were winning. And when you stopped doing that, we started losing. So what I need you to do, Ed, is to email and guarantee the Kings are going to lose every game so that we can start winning again. You mentioned Mitch Marner. How are the Maple Leafs going to convince Mitch Marner to waive his no movement clause? He's not going to do that. So there's that. And by the way, my wife told me it was your birthday, Ed. So happy birthday. All right. I hope that was not too much for you guys. I hope I didn't fly through it too much, but we actually did get all the emails in, and we only went over time a little bit. So thank you for everyone who took the time to email. The show is literally not possible without your participation. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you want to get an email in for the feedback show or anything else, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section. We'd love you to stay interact with the show on social media. X, Twitter, Instagram, we're at Locked On LA Kings. And for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings now, every day we are going to have a Saturday show. It will be shortly after the conclusion of the Kings Hurricanes game coming up at 5 p.m. LA time on Saturday, the end of this ungodly road trip. If you want to watch, you can see the game on KCAL 9 locally, ESPN Plus nationally, and you can hear it on the 710 ESPN app. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Saturday. And as always, go Kings go.